key to commercial construction risk mitigation. In this video, I'm going to give you, and this is a 5-minute video, I'm going to give you a shorter list of the things that we have to consider from a risk standpoint. Then I'll link you to longer videos that talk about the detailed aspects of risk mitigation. And so I love this because we have to keep this top of mind. In fact, for myself, I remind myself, I'll even look up on ChatGPT, like, hey, what are some things that I should be focused on? Because we've got to keep our risk hats on to run an effective business. So if you're into that, stay with us. All right, so let me just say this, like 2 key principles. You've probably read, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and you've heard, in a business, there's finance, there's marketing, there's operations, and there has to be risk and product, right? You have to have all 5 of these. Risk is one of those that we rarely focus on. We have to anticipate things going wrong. You have to assume that you're going to get sued. You have to assume that something's going to go wrong. You have to assume that your project is going to get impacted. You have to assume somebody's going to get hurt. Those things aren't going to make them happen. They're going to make you think that they'll happen so that you work to prevent them, okay? So I'm not saying somebody needs to get hurt or it's inevitable, right? We should think that that injuries are and accidents are preventable. But the bottom line is we have to know that they're possible so that we take the right steps to prevent them. So let me go through a quick list of things to keep an eye out for. Number 1, thorough risk assessment, and then I would say planning. And so what I mean by that is when you are in pre-construction and you do your reference class, like it says in the book, How Big Things Get Done, and then you go through and you do your risk review in your Fresh Eyes meeting, you're going to fill out a risk and opportunity register, and you're either going to get rid of the risk with proper planning, or you're going to make sure it's covered with contingency, or you're going to eat it with fee. But you're never, which you probably won't do that one either, but you're never going to wishfully think it away because it won't go away. And so you have to make sure that you have proper planning to get rid of the risk and contingency planning if it still happens, and then monitor that on a continual basis. So we've got to know what the risks are, and that means everybody on the site. Number 2, from a risk standpoint, I'm not super huge on getting litigious when it comes to contracts and things like that, but when we're talking about scope, we're talking about process, when we're talking about insurance, which we'll talk about later, and when we're talking about contracts, we've got to have effective and fair contracts to cover ourselves from a risk standpoint so that everybody knows what they're responsible for, they're legally bound to it, and the legal system will support the proper execution of the project. The bottom line is handshakes don't work anymore, because if you make an agreement with me, I would honor that agreement, sorry, but what if I died? What about my spouse? What about the company? What about the company lawyer? What about, like, in the United States legal system, you have to be covered from a legal standpoint. The handshake world is gone. Now, do you have to be abusive with your contracts? No. Do you have to be silly when it comes to insurance? No. But be appropriate and make sure that the risk has been mitigated and that everything has been done in a way to capture the proper scope and make sure that everybody's owning their portion of the project. Number 3, effective communication. This might not sound like a risk category, but I remember talking to a really awesome lean expert one time, and I said, his name was Paul Dunlop. He's fantastic. I watch his LinkedIn posts all the time. And I did a podcast with him. I said, what's the number 1 problem with organizations, projects, or whatever, any sphere, any level? And immediately, without hesitation, he said, communication. A lack of communication makes things fall apart. A lack of communication in teams makes things fall apart. A lack of communication gets people off track to where they're not heading in the same direction, and you will head into a risk that otherwise could have been prevented when you're using the genius of the team. And then I'll give you 2 more. Safety is a huge risk. We don't have the time to deal with safety problems. We don't have the time to deal with lax cleanliness. On our project sites, we have to be 0 tolerance for safety, 0 tolerance for cleanliness, and fanatical when it comes to organization. We cannot hurt somebody, ever. One of your biggest risks on a construction project is when it comes to safety. There's no excuses, no mediocrity here. I'm talking absolute fanatical. full PPE, everybody following the rules, always with fall protection, always doing the right paperwork, always complying with OSHA regulations all the time. We have to be fanatical about that. And lastly, contingency planning. Whether we're talking about budgets or contracts or safety, we have to have contingency planning. Yes, we have a plan A. What's plan B, C, or D? Because things will go wrong. We should not anticipate perfection. We should be like Napoleon in the Napoleonic Wars. He outmaneuvered the Austrians because when something went wrong, he already had a plan B. Something went wrong, plan C. Something went wrong, plan D. Same thing with us. Buffers, contingencies, and contingency plans with anything that has a high level of risk so that we can maintain our safety on the project site and reduce our risk and make sure that we are financially and operationally whole throughout that project. And so I'm going to turn this into a quick little blog post and link you to the longer video for this, but this is just a quick list. Make sure these things are in place and think to yourself right now, please, what gaps do I have, and go fix them. I hope you've enjoyed this video. On we go.